The year is 1861, Windsor Castle, England. A woman sits alone in a room full of clocks. She is the most powerful person on earth. She rules an empire so large that somewhere in it, the sun is always shining. But right now, she is not thinking about her empire. She is thinking about a man. A quiet, serious man who loved music, who made her laugh, who knew how to make her feel safe in a world that never let her rest. His name was Albert, and he died that morning. She was 42 years old. She would live for 40 more years after this, and for almost all of those 40 years, she wore black every single day. Welcome back, my friends. Today we tell the story of Queen Victoria, but not the story of power, the story of the woman inside the crown. Here is something important to understand. She ruled for 63 years. 63 years. Longer than any British monarch before her. She ruled through wars, revolutions, and the invention of the telephone, the railway, and the light bulb. But here is the other number. 9. Victoria was 9 years old when she first understood that one day she would be queen. Think about that. A 9-year-old girl, looking at a list of names, kings and queens who came before her, and suddenly understanding, I am next. That moment changed everything about who she became. Let me take you back to the beginning. The year is 1819. London is cold and gray. In a palace not far from the River Thames, a baby girl is born. Her name is Alexandrina Victoria, but nobody calls her Alexandrina. She is simply Drina, a small, round-faced girl with large blue eyes and a very loud voice. Her father dies when she is 8 months old. 8 months. She never knows him at all. And so Victoria grows up in a world made almost entirely of rules. Her mother, a German princess named Victoria Mary, is a careful, anxious woman. She is also completely controlled by a man named John Conroy. Conroy is not a king. He is not even a lord. He is a servant who wants power, and he found it, right next to a lonely widow raising a future queen. He created something called the Kensington system. That is what historians call it now. But for young Victoria, it had a simpler name: a prison. Under the Kensington system, Victoria was never allowed to be alone. Never. Not for 1 minute. She slept in the same room as her mother every single night. She walked downstairs only while holding an adult's hand. She was never allowed to speak to anyone who had not been approved in advance. Think about what that does to a child. She had no friends her own age, no private thoughts that felt truly private, no space to make a mistake without someone watching. She kept a diary, and even that was read by her mother every evening. But Victoria had something Conroy did not expect. She had a temper. A real one. She argued. She pushed back. She refused to sign documents Conroy placed in front of her. She sat in silence for hours rather than give him what he wanted. And she wrote. Every day she wrote in that diary. Feelings, frustrations, small moments of joy, a walk in the garden, a piece of music she heard, a drawing she made. She put herself somewhere no one could control. Conroy called her difficult. Her mother called her stubborn. They were both right. And that stubbornness, the very thing they tried to crush, was exactly what made her a great queen. Conroy believed that if he kept Victoria small, weak, and dependent, then when she became queen, he would be the one with real power. He was wrong. Victoria was not weak. She was not dependent. She was not afraid. She was waiting. Victoria woke up and everything had changed. King William IV had died in the night. Victoria was now the Queen of England. She was 18 years old. The very first thing she did that morning? She asked to be alone. Just 1 hour. In a room by herself. For the first time in her life, no mother watching, no convoy hovering, no guard standing at her shoulder. 1 hour of silence. And then she walked out and began to be queen. Within weeks, she removed Conroy from the palace completely. She moved her mother's bedroom to a different part of the castle. She began to build the life that had been kept from her. Can you imagine that? 18 years old, ruling one of the most powerful empires on earth. And the greatest victory of your first week? Sleeping in a room by yourself. Now, there is one part of the story that most people know something about, but they usually know only half of it. The love story. In 1839, Victoria met her cousin Albert. He was a German prince, serious, thoughtful, a little awkward at parties. He loved music and science. He did not particularly love crowds. Victoria fell in love almost immediately. And here is something remarkable about this woman. She proposed to him. In those days, and remember, this was 1839, a woman asking a man to marry her was almost unheard of. It was not done. It was not proper. Some people said it was shocking. But Victoria was the queen. Nobody could tell her no. So she called Albert to her private room. She told him she would be very happy if he agreed to marry her. He agreed. She asked. He said yes. They changed history together. Victoria wore a white dress, and that choice, a simple, personal choice, changed weddings around the world forever. Before Victoria, brides wore all kinds of colors. After Victoria, white became the color of weddings everywhere. Think about that. Every white wedding dress you have ever seen carries a small piece of her story inside it. Victoria and Albert had 9 children. 9. They ruled together, not always easily, but always as partners. Albert was not just a husband. He was her advisor, her closest friend, her calm when she was storming. Victoria had a powerful personality. She could be stubborn. She could be sharp. She knew it. Albert knew how to sit with her through it. She once wrote in her diary, "He is my whole world." And then, in December 1861, he was gone. A fever, a fast illness. Albert was 42 years old. Victoria was destroyed. She did not leave her room for days. When she finally came out, she was wearing black. She would wear black for the next 40 years. She kept his clothes in his bedroom. She had his shaving basin brought to her every morning, filled with warm water, as if he might walk in and use it. She put a cast of his hand on her bedside table so she could touch it before she slept. People said she had gone too far, that it was too much, that a queen must be strong, must be seen, must continue. But Victoria was not performing grief. She was living it. Here is where the story becomes something else entirely. After Albert died, many people expected Victoria to step back. A grieving widow, a woman alone. Perhaps she would let others lead. Instead, she became more powerful. She became the grandmother of Europe. Quite literally. Her children and grandchildren married into almost every royal family on the continent. The Tsar of Russia, the Emperor of Germany, the King of Greece. They were all connected to Victoria by blood. And yet her own country could not fully understand her. There was a period, a long, difficult period, when the British people began to lose patience. Victoria refused to appear in public. She refused to open Parliament in person. She was hidden away in her castles, mourning. Newspapers called her the Widow of Windsor. Some people said she should give up the crown. There were even small protests in the streets of London, something almost unthinkable for a British monarch. One man tried to protect her reputation. His name was Benjamin Disraeli. He was her prime minister, her chief advisor, and he understood something important. He understood that Victoria needed to feel seen. Not managed, not corrected, seen. Disraeli was an unusual man. He was a writer before he was a politician. He understood how stories work, and he understood that Victoria's story, the grieving queen hidden from her people, was becoming the wrong story. He wrote her letters. Long, warm, personal letters. Not official letters about policy in Parliament. Personal ones. He described flowers blooming outside his window. He told her small jokes. He asked for her opinion not because he had to, but because he was genuinely curious what she thought. He called her the Fairy Queen, a fairy tale name for a real woman. She loved it. He brought her into conversations about the empire as though her opinion truly mattered, because to him, it did. He told her, "You are not just the ruler of England. You are the mother of a family that covers the world." And slowly, very slowly, Victoria began to return. She appeared in public. She opened Parliament. In 1876, she received a new title, Empress of India. She stood on a balcony and the crowd below her cheered. She had not heard that sound in a long time. And something shifted. The people who had been frustrated with her began to feel something else. Pride, affection, even love. The Widow of Windsor became, once again, their queen. By the end of her life, Victoria had become something much larger than a monarch. She had become a symbol. Not of power, though she had enormous power. Not of empire, though her empire covered nearly a quarter of the world's surface. She had become a symbol of something harder to name. Something like the possibility of continuing, of not giving up even when everything has been taken from you. She lost her husband. She lost 2 of her children. She survived 8 assassination attempts, 8 different people who tried to shoot or attack her in public. 8 times someone pointed a weapon at her. 8 times she survived. And each time she went back to work. She lived through a world that changed faster than any world before it. Trains, telegraphs, electric lights, the first photographs, the first moving pictures. The world of her childhood and the world of her old age were almost unrecognizable from each other. She saw all of it. She continued through all of it. She was young. She was broken. She was still queen. Victoria died quietly at her home on the Isle of Wight. She was 81 years old. Around her, as she passed, were her children, her grandchildren, and her dog, a small white Pomeranian named Turi, placed gently on her bed. Her funeral was the largest gathering of European royalty in history. Every crown on the continent came to say goodbye. My friends, here is what I keep thinking about after this story. We talk about Queen Victoria like she was a force of nature, unmovable, permanent, the queen who never changed. But she changed constantly. She was a child in a prison who became a queen before she could vote. She was a woman so deeply in love that she proposed to a man in an era when women did not do that. She was a widow so completely broken that her country almost turned against her. And then she came back, and they loved her more than before. The best things about Victoria were not her crowns or her titles. They were her stubbornness, her grief, her loyalty, her very human insistence on feeling everything completely. She did not perform strength. She lived it. Quietly, imperfectly, day after day. Next time you see a white wedding dress, remember this. That choice came from one young woman who wanted to wear something beautiful on the happiest day of her life. And every time you hear the word Victorian, Remember that behind it is not a rigid old era of rules and corsets. Behind it is a girl who was never allowed to walk downstairs alone, who was never allowed one private thought, who was watched every moment of every day, and who became, despite all of that, perhaps because of all of that, the most powerful woman in the world. At one point in her life, at her lowest, darkest point, Victoria sat alone in a room full of silent clocks, wearing black, holding a plaster cast of her husband's hand. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is holding on to something they cannot let go of. Some memory, some person, some version of the life they once had. Victoria would understand that. She would not tell them to stop. She would simply say, "Keep going." The distance between her grief and yours is smaller than you think. Thank you for traveling it with me. Until next time.